Thank you. I don't promise to be quite as passionate as Kevin, coming from that slightly different point of view. It would just give me a little bit of context to get a feel for what my audience is tonight, and it's fantastic to see so many of you here, so thank you for coming out on this rather chilly, wintry evening. How many people do we have that are, like Kevin, parents? Fantastic. And how many people do we have that provide services for people on the spectrum, whether that be education or rehab or therapy? Terrific. And do we have any other researchers here? No? Educationalists?
One.
Excellent. Educationalists? I know we've got a couple of educationalists out there. Okay, the other question I just wanted to ask you is how many people here actually have dogs? Okay, so to some extent then I'm probably going to be telling you a lot of things that you know intuitively anyway, but we'll try and put a little bit of science around it for you. So Kevin's asked me to try and explain the mechanisms about how animal-assisted therapy can work with autism spectrum disorder. It's a rather big ask for a few minutes that we had this evening, but one of the most exciting breakthroughs from my point of view in recent times is the information about how oxytocin can interrelate with this condition, and how when people are struggling to fit in socially and have social communication, oxytocin has a pivotal role. It's also known as the affiliative hormone. So whenever we make a social interaction, our oxytocin secretion is increased, and in order for us to create a social memory of someone that we've met, it cannot happen if oxytocin is not present. So the other things that happen with oxytocin's secretion is that we trust people more intuitively, we are much more open to talking with other people, and basically it just acts as a great social lubricant. All right. So imagine my great delight when I found some studies that show when you interact with dogs, the first thing that happens is your oxytocin levels go up. And that it's actually mutual. In both species this happens. So if you're massaging your dog, you're getting the great feel-good hormones going around your body, and so is the dog. So it's a very synergistic relationship. And I guess as time is going along, we're getting some great studies now that are being done using nasal administration of oxytocin, and we're waiting for some of those results now. There's a study at Monash University that's currently underway. So, that's going to be really interesting to get those results. And to me, it would not surprise me that part of the reason that dogs do have an effect for people on the spectrum is that in some ways they're almost effectively mobile oxytocin distribution system. That sounds very, very callous, and it's not, I don't want to diminish the role of the relationship, but in terms of the physiology, I suspect that we're going to find it's quite an important part of the process. As Kevin so eloquently described, the anxiety and fear that's involved for many people who are suffering or on the spectrum is a key component of not being willing to take risks, not being willing to interact with other people, and so on. And we've known for many, many years that there's a very strong anxiolytic component. That means anxiety-reducing component to our interaction with animals. Again, you interact with a dog. It doesn't have to be a known dog. It doesn't have to be your pet dog. But your heart rate goes down, your BP goes down, your feeling of stress goes down. Just your general feeling of well-being increases. So again, you can see how easily that would apply and translate to people on the spectrum in terms of giving them perhaps preparedness and less fear about trying things and engaging. We know that all the stress hormones are reduced in secretion, cortisol, adrenaline, aldosterone, and so on. We know that things like oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins are all released in response to interacting with animals. We know that working with a therapy dog does result in a significant amount of behavioural improvement for children on the spectrum. 20 minutes interaction with them produces measurable changes, many more instances of smiling, of pro-social behaviours, less antisocial or meltdown type behaviours, greater tolerance for noise and other things around them. Okay? There's one study that's been conducted with a resident dedicated service dog, which has shown that when children with ASD wake in the morning after sleeping with the dog on their bed, their cortisol levels are much lower. What's not reported as part of that study is that they actually sleep much better as well. That did happen. So I think you have perhaps a double whammy there of, because there's less cortisol and less stress, the child's more likely to sleep effectively, but also because the dog's on the bed, you're getting an application of deep pressure, which certainly in some cases can have significant benefits. And those of you that have probably read a lot about spectrum know of a lady called Temple Grandin.
Yeah.
Yes. And this lady, being a scientist herself and a very, very high functioning autist, actually built her own deep pressure machine because it gave her a feeling of calmness which enabled her to cope. So there's probably an element of that to it as well. The other thing about sleeping is that it can also have benefits to the parents. Because I don't know about you guys, but if I don't sleep very well, I don't cope as well with stuff in my life. And if I sleep well, then I have better tolerance, I can cope with things, and just generally manage my life, and therefore any other things that I have to deal with much better. I guess for many people, absconding is a real worry. How many people have got young children? Yeah, so with this group here also. And one of the very easy things to teach a service dog to do is to track a child. So even if the child gets out, and there's in the paper that Kevin will send through to you, there are some quotes from some people that have given some feedback after having a service dog. But even if the child does still wake at night and get up, the calm that the parents feel is, they know that really they can always find them again. And it's not such a big problem. So even though it's still a serious event, it's dealable with. So the stress levels of the parents are also diminished. Something that has been reported for many years, back in even 1920s, 1930s, is that people who are at disadvantage, whether it be they're homeless or they just don't look very nice or they behave strangely or whatever, if you put a dog with those individuals, all of a sudden they become eminently approachable. Whereas people would go out of their way to perhaps avoid these individuals before, now all of a sudden there's a social bridge that's been established which enables people to go up to them and go. And the other really nice thing about this is it's a very ritualised and predictable type of social interaction. And it generally follows the course of, what a lovely dog, what type is she, particularly if she's something like Spot, which is quite unusual in Australia and a big talking point. What breed is she? How old is she? What's her name? Oh, isn't she lovely? And so all of a sudden there's this really predictable social interaction which again results in community acceptance. And all of a sudden the person is no longer that strange person, but that Spot's owner, for instance. Okay? And so they become part of the community as Spot's owner. And that helps that social connectedness and reintegration back into the community. And yes, there are many benefits in terms of the oxytocin increasing trust and openness and willingness to take on things that can be utilised extremely well in the educational world. Okay? And you're going to hear about an example of this later on from Maggie. But the really great things about dogs is we can take them everywhere. They're pretty much accepted everywhere. They can walk with us, they can go on buses, trains, they can go to parties with us. You know, they can really, really promote our whole social life and social interaction. And equally so at school. So not only do they promote social interaction within the peer group, enabling friends to be made, but also with the teachers, who then become much more approachable, that there's a stronger line of communication. And because of the adaptability of the canine species, we can involve them in virtually every part of the curriculum. You know, by being very smart about what we do, we can involve them in language, we can involve them in mathematics, we can involve them in orientation, spatial recognition, geography, all sorts of things. We can involve them in peripheral skills that link back to the dogs. So we can actually lever against them. And what Kevin said about it's not just a dog, but the program, is a vital difference that I really want you to understand, because yes, you may have a great tool, but unless you know how to use it properly, you can only gain a certain number of the benefits from it. We know that the physical presence and feel, even the smell of an animal can help regain contact with the here and now. And one of the things that you would regularly do with a child that engages in certain ritualistic behaviours is that you would train a behavioural interrupt. Now, the really bizarre thing is that if a parent went in to interrupt this ritual behaviour, let's say, for instance, that it's stacking bricks or putting lines of motor cars down, if the parent disrupts it, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to have a major meltdown on your hands. But if you train the dog to go in and disrupt it, all of a sudden actually it becomes funny. And more often than not, the child giggles, and it's an acceptable thing. Okay? The really, really cool thing, for instance, that I have noticed with Kevin's son is the behavioural interrupt that we've trained Spot to do for Iran. He hates it. So it's not always a particularly positive interrupt, but he particularly doesn't like it. And what's happened now is he can see, because it's all a game for her, so she sees him start to escalate. She goes, "Yay, game's on!" And she's getting ready to interrupt. And he can see her behaviour, and he now takes a step back, and he has to give her a command for her to stop. So in doing so, he's taking control of his own behaviour, which is cutting his escalation cycle. And it's just a wonderful thing to see happen. And she, of course, doesn't approve, because she doesn't get to play this wonderful game as much as she likes. I'm not sure that I'm going to go on much more, because I think it's really important to see. You've heard a parent's experience. You will hear actually another parent's experience and an educational experience too from Maggie a bit later on. I think those are really important things for you, particularly parents and the other service providers here to listen. So I'll be around and, perfectly happy to answer questions and things like that. And you will get that white paper to have a look at as well. If you have any questions, just save them up and we'll have a talk later. So thank you. Thank you.
I must tell you that while Linda was talking,